Hey there, come a little closer to the fire with me. Tonight, I want to tell you a darker truth that somehow feels like a blanket when you let it settle on your shoulders. It is the kind of truth that used to make people tremble, and then, after a while, breathe easier. The kind you can listen to with half-closed eyes while the room stays dim and safe. It begins before any beginning, before a first sunrise, before a first name, before anyone could point and say, "Here is the edge of the world." There is a story that says consciousness was already there, waiting in the deep, quiet dark, and that it sometimes shows itself as Shiva. If you stay with me, you will hear about a pillar of fire that never burns, stretching endlessly up and down, so even gods cannot find its end. You will hear about a third eye that can open like a small dawn and make whole ages fall silent. You will hear about a river held gently in tangled hair so it will not flood the worlds. And you will hear about a dance that looks like destruction, yet somehow leaves behind a calm, clean space, like a room swept clear after a long storm. If you enjoy slow, mythic stories like this one, please like the video and subscribe. It helps this little candlelit corner find the people who need it. Now let the world soften. Let the light in your room dim a little more, even if only in your imagination. Feel your jaw unclench. Feel your shoulders loosen, as if someone quietly unknotted a ribbon. Take one slow breath in through the nose and let it go, unhurried, as if your lungs are a tide that knows it has all night. Good. I am sitting beside a fireplace as I speak, and the flames keep rearranging themselves, never rushing, never staying the same, just quietly doing what fire does. The air smells faintly of smoke and dry wood. If you were standing here with me, you might notice the soft sound of ash settling, like dust taking its time. That sound, small as it is, always makes me think of ancient stories. Because in those stories, everything ends up as dust eventually. And somehow that is not meant to terrify. It is meant to. So, let us step into the dark that existed before time took shape. Imagine an emptiness that is not a cold hole, but a vast, quiet room, with no walls, no ceiling, no floor, not even a direction you could call up or down, only still potential, like a breath held so softly you cannot tell whether it has begun yet. In the old telling, Shiva is not introduced like a prince in a family tree. There is no cradle, no lineage recited in proud order. He is described with a strange simplicity, not created, not born, simply present, Swayambhu, self-existent. And I have always found it strange, in a good way, how the mind relaxes when it hears that, as if it is tired of chasing causes and reasons, and finally meets something that does not need to explain itself. When people speak of Shiva, they often call him Mahadeva, the great god. But that word great does not mean loud. It does not mean a bigger throne or a brighter crown. It means something quieter and deeper. It means the witness behind every scene, the awareness that does not start and stop the way ordinary things do. In the stories, the universe becomes a kind of rhythm, and within that rhythm there is a triad, a balance that keeps existence from tearing itself apart. Brahma, the one who brings forms into being. Vishnu, the one who holds them steady. Shiva, the one who dissolves them when they have grown thin and worn, so the next form can arrive without having to fight for space. Sometimes people hear the word destroyer and their thoughts tighten like a fist. I understand. You know that feeling when a word hits an old nerve and suddenly you are bracing for something sharp? But in this mythology, destruction is not spite. It is transformation. It is the moment a leaf lets go in late season, so the branch does not break under its weight. It is the quiet crumbling of clay that has dried too long, so it can be mixed with water again and shaped into something new. Picture a potter at night, hands dusted with pale powder, the smell of wet earth rising from a bowl. The potter presses too hard, and the rim collapses. It looks like a loss, yet the potter does not mourn. He gathers the clay, adds a little water, kneads it patiently, and begins again. In that gentle, practical motion, you can feel what the stories mean when they place Shiva in the triad. Shiva is the force that says, this form has completed its time. It is not a punishment. It is a turning of the page. And maybe that is why Shiva is often described in ways that make polite society uneasy. Ash on the skin, hair matted into a wild knot, Rudra beads clicking softly as he moves. A tiger skin at the waist, not as a trophy, but as a symbol of untamed nature made calm. A skull bowl in some legends, not to glorify death, but to remind the living that pride is temporary and therefore not worth clenching around. Honestly, there is a comfort in that, a comfort that arrives after the first shiver. Because if everything is held by cycles, then nothing has to be held by you alone. Now imagine the cosmos waking, not with a bang, but with a pulse, a subtle vibration, like a drumbeat heard from very far away, so far that it is more a feeling in the chest than a sound in the ear. In Shiva's hand, that drum is called the Damaru, a small hourglass shape. In the mythic imagination, its rhythm is the rhythm of becoming, not only seconds and hours, but the first stirring of patterns that will later look like stars. When Shiva is spoken of as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, it is this rhythm that matters. The dance is not entertainment. It is the universe moving because it cannot help but move. I want you to picture it slowly, as if we are watching through a veil of candle smoke. A foot lifts, the ankle turns, the air around it seems to thicken, like warm water. A hand opens, palm forward, a gesture that says, do not be afraid. Another hand holds fire, but it does not rage. It simply glows, a small, contained brightness, the way embers glow when you stir them with a poker and then leave them alone again. This is what I mean when I say dark stories can become calm. They are dark because they tell you that worlds end. They are calm because they tell you that endings are built into the pattern, and the pattern is older than panic. If you have ever stood in a museum and felt that hush, that strange quiet where ancient objects sit behind glass, you might know what I mean. The air seems full of time, a clay lamp, a bead necklace, a fragment of stone with a worn carving. The past is not screaming, it is simply present. The present, too, will someday sit in that same hush. In the mythology, Shiva is that hush. And yet, he moves. The stories will soon bring us to a moment where even Brahma and Vishnu, even the ones who create and preserve, forget their balance and fall into a dispute. It happens, as disputes often do, through pride, through the subtle urge to be first, to be central, to be the one whose name is spoken last in reverence. The universe, in that moment, trembles, not because it is fragile, but because even the highest forces can slip into comparison. And then the pillar appears, but we are not there yet. For now, I want you to settle into the idea that Shiva is not an enemy of life. Shiva is the slow closing of a hand around what is already finished, so the next thing can open. Let your breathing take on that same rhythm, in and out. A small creation, a small dissolution, in and out. Each time you exhale, imagine you are letting a little dust drift off your thoughts, like ash falling from a log after the flame has passed. And while you rest there, in that simple cycle, let the story carry you closer to the first great sign of infinity, the quiet fire that does not burn. There is another form the stories whisper about, and it has always felt like a candle held between two mirrors, Ardhanarishvara. Half of Shiva is male, half is female, as if the divine body decided to show you the secret that opposites are not enemies. The right side, the Shiva side, is marked by simplicity, the skin dusted with ash, the beads cool against the chest, the matted hair gathered high. That side feels like stillness, like the pause between two heartbeats when everything is quiet and watching. The left side, the Shakti side, is different without being separate. Silk brushing softly against the thigh, gold catching the candlelight in a small, warm flash. Hair braided and adorned with flowers. That side feels like motion, like water choosing its path, like a thought that becomes a song. The myth is saying, gently, that reality is one body wearing two expressions, consciousness and energy, witness and wave, the silent room and the footsteps in it. Hold that in your mind for a moment, and you may notice how the body settles, how the shoulders sink a fraction lower, how the breath becomes less like effort, more like a simple fact. Now, in the old cosmic halls, there comes a time when the triad forgets this unity. Brahma, who creates, and Vishnu, who preserves, begin to argue over supremacy. I picture it as two bright voices echoing in a long stone chamber, the kind of chamber where your footsteps become a slow drum. Their dispute grows until the cosmos itself begins to wobble, as if reality does not like being pulled in two directions at once. And then, something appears that ends the argument without a single insult. A column of fire. Not a small flame you can cup in your hands. A vast, unwavering pillar of brilliance, rising and sinking beyond sight. Its light is said to outshine 1,000 suns, and yet it does not burn. It simply is. A presence more than a phenomenon. Curiosity takes them. Brahma becomes a swan and rises, wings beating through layers of sky that are not quite sky, through corridors of time where whole ages drift like dust motes in a sunbeam. Vishnu becomes a boar and digs downward, pushing through strata of reality, past the roots of worlds that mortals have never named. They search for what seems like forever, thousands of cosmic years. The stories say, imagine the candle beside you burning down, then another, until counting itself feels sleepy, and still the pillar has no end. At last they return, humbled in a way that is almost tender. The argument has drained away, like water sinking back into soil. Then the pillar begins to change. The fire softens at the edges, and within it, a still figure is revealed, as if the light has been a curtain and someone has just drawn it back. Shiva, ash on the skin that looks like stardust in candlelight, hair piled high, and within it, a crescent moon resting like a quiet jewel. A third eye present, not raging, just there. Serpents coiled, not striking, simply resting, like time itself choosing to be calm for a while. In one hand, the small drum, in another, fire, and in the way he stands, perfect stillness that somehow contains all motion. The two gods understand without being told. The pillar was not an object to be measured. It was their own source, the ground beneath their powers, the awareness through which they had been searching. If you let that idea drift through you, like cool water through warm hands, it may bring a kind of ease. You do not have to reach the end of the pillar. You do not have to solve infinity. You can simply rest in the awareness that is already here, listening. And as we rest here together, beside the fire, we can carry this image into the next part of the story. Because after the gods are humbled, Shiva's stillness does not stay private. It begins to spill into the world, into mountains, into rivers, into love, into grief. Listen to the crackle of the log, or imagine it if your room is quiet. Each tiny pop is wood letting go of what it used to be, a slow surrender, a useful one, the kind that warms you. That is what the myth keeps circling back to, the letting go that makes room. So when you hear destroyer, try hearing the one who clears the table, the one who brushes the crumbs into his palm, not in anger, not in disgust, just with patience, so the next meal can be placed there gently. In a moment, the story will move higher, into the cold, thin air of Mount Kailash, into the silence of the cosmos. And when it reaches the where Shiva sits in meditation so deep it seems to steady the whole sky. It will move into the braided line of the Ganga, water made safe by hair. It will move into devotion that grows so bright it becomes dangerous, and into love that becomes loss, and loss that becomes another turning of the page. But for now, stay here with me, in this quiet room. Let the pillar of fire stand in your mind like a warm vertical line in the darkness. No top, no bottom, only presence. Breathe once more, slow and easy, and let the next breath arrive on its own. The pillar fades, not by vanishing, but by becoming background, the way a steady sound disappears when you stop fighting it. And what remains, in the stories, is Shiva's stillness. High above the ordinary world, where air thins and even speech feels like it should be whispered, there is Mount Kailash. Not merely a mountain, they say, but a kind of axis, as if the whole universe quietly leans on it the way a tired person leans on a doorframe at the end of the day. I want you to picture the climb without hurrying, stone underfoot, cold and slightly damp, where shadows hold on to the night. A faint grit of dust that coats the edges of your sandals, wind that does not roar, but keeps testing the seams of your clothing with gentle fingers. If you breathe in, the air feels sharp and clean, like water that has been chilled in clay. If you breathe out, you can almost see the breath, a pale mist that drifts away and is gone. At the summit, there is no throne made of gold. There is simply a seat of rock, and on it, Shiva in meditation. Spine straight as a mountain ridge, legs folded in the still geometry of lotus, hands resting open, palms up, fingers softly curved, as if they are holding nothing, and therefore holding everything. His eyes half closed, not asleep, not watching the world in the usual way, but resting in a place where inner and outer are not so separate. Sometimes I imagine the sound there. Not silence exactly. Silence has texture. It has layers. There is the hush of snow settling, the faint scrape of ice shifting on stone, the faraway murmur of wind moving through narrow passes like breath moving through the throat. And underneath all of that, a steadier quiet, as if the mountain itself is listening to him. The old texts say his meditation is not only personal practice, it is cosmic stability. His breath regulates winds. His heartbeat keeps time with the stars. That is a grand claim, and we cannot measure it the way we measure ordinary things, but the image is clear enough to feel in your bones. Somewhere, something sits so calmly that everything else is allowed to change without falling apart. You know that feeling when you are anxious, and then you find one small point of steadiness, like the weight of your blanket or the sound of rain, and suddenly the mind stops spinning so fast. The myth takes that feeling and stretches it to a universe. Shiva as the great meditator, Adiyogi, the first yogi, the one who discovered how to be perfectly still without becoming numb, perfectly awake without becoming tense. In time, the story says, 7 sages came to that mountain. They had traveled through long years and longer silences to reach him. Their footsteps on the slope were slow, careful, the way you walk in a room where someone is sleeping. They sat at a respectful distance, and they waited. No demand, no shouting of prayers, just presence, just patience. And this part always feels important to me, because it suggests that wisdom is not always given to the loudest voice. Sometimes it comes to the one who can wait, and breathe, and listen. When Shiva finally opened his eyes a little more, the gaze did not feel like a spotlight. It felt like the first warm light of morning, touching everything without picking favorites. In that gaze, the sages received the science of yoga, not as a lecture, but as a transfer, like a flame touching a wick and making a second flame without making the first one smaller. Some legends named the sages Kashyapa, Atri, Vasishta, Vishwamitra, Gautama, Jamadagni, Bharadvaja, names that sound like stones you could hold in the hand, each carrying weight. And with each of them, the teachings traveled outward into the world, becoming breath practices, postures, attention itself, becoming the small methods people use at night to settle their minds. Maybe that is why we are here together now, listening to a myth by firelight. It is the same impulse, the same wish, to find the calm center inside the turning world. But Shiva does not remain only still. As soon as you think of him as a mountain that never moves, the story tilts and shows you another image. Shiva as Nataraja, the dancer, the one whose motion is as fundamental as his meditation. It is a strange pairing, stillness and dance. Yet, if you listen closely, your own body is doing both. Your breath moves, and yet there is also something in you that stays. Your heart beats, and yet you remain yourself. Movement and stillness are braided. The myth simply makes that braid visible. So picture the dance, not in a bright stage hall, but in a sacred space where the air is thick with incense and candle smoke. The floor is cool stone, worn smooth by countless barefoot steps. Dust gathers in the corners, fine as flour. A lamp flame trembles, then steadies. In Shiva's upper right hand, the damaru sounds. Not a loud drum, a small, quick pulse, like the ticking of time when you hold a watch to your ear. The sound is said to be the first vibration, the seed of all words. And when I imagine it, I imagine the universe responding the way a sleeping body responds to a familiar lullaby, stirring, not with fear, but with recognition. In the upper left hand, fire, a tongue of flame, bright and clean, the kind of fire that does not scream. It transforms. It dries wet clay into pottery. It turns raw grain into bread. It takes what is too much and makes it simpler. The lower right hand is a gesture of reassurance, fearlessness, like a quiet promise. Even if forms dissolve, you are not being thrown away. You are being carried back into something wider. And the lower left hand points, not accusing, but guiding. It draws the eye toward the raised foot, toward release, toward the possibility of stepping out of the loop of grasping and panic. Beneath the dancing foot is a small figure, a dwarf demon in the old story, Apasmara, embodiment of ignorance. Shiva does not erase it. He presses it down. He keeps it in its place. I have always liked that detail, because it feels honest. Ignorance is not a thing you kill once and never meet again. It is something you learn to notice, to steady, to keep from taking over. And then there is the hair, wild in motion, streaming outward as if the dance itself is flinging energy into the cosmos. Within it, the crescent moon. Within it, the suggestion of the Ganga. Within it, serpents, symbols of time and cycles, becoming ornaments rather than threats. Yet the face remains calm. Half-closed eyes, a soft mouth, serenity in motion. The story says Shiva's dance has different moods. A dance of bliss, a dance of fierce correction, a dance of nurturing growth. But the most famous moment, the one that lingers like a shadow at the edge of candlelight, happens in a forest grove called Tilai, later known as Chidambaram. In that forest, there were sages, not ordinary villagers, not careless people. Sages who had practiced, who had studied, who had built an ashram in the deep green hush. They performed rituals. They tended sacred fires. They spoke mantras into the night air and watched sparks rise like tiny stars. Their practice had power. That is important. The myth does not mock them for being weak. It troubles them for being proud. It is a quiet danger, pride. It arrives like dust, a thin layer at first, almost invisible. Then one day you notice your fingers are gritty with it. You notice your thoughts have stiffened. You notice you are certain you deserve respect. When word of that pride reached the cosmic realms, Shiva decided to teach them, not with punishment, but with a demonstration that would loosen their certainty like water loosens hard soil. He came as a wandering ascetic, wearing ash instead of perfumed paste, hair uncombed, the look of someone who had slept under open sky. With him came Vishnu, in the form of a dazzling woman, beauty moving like a slow river through the grove, making even disciplined minds feel heat rise behind the ribs. The sages, instead of bowing, felt anger. Their wives and disciples, instead of rejecting the visitors, felt drawn. And there, in that tension, you can sense the myth tightening, preparing to show how quickly a mind can lose its balance when it thinks it is already above temptation. The sages decided to drive the ascetic away. They gathered around their ritual fire and began to chant. The air thickened, the flames sharpened, and from that fire they drew out creations meant to frighten, to overwhelm. First, a tiger, not a natural animal, but a shape of fury made from ritual force. Its eyes were hot with intent. Its body moved like a shadow with claws. It sprang. Shiva did not flinch. He caught it, as if catching a thrown cloth, and in that strange, almost casual gesture, the tiger's skin became a garment around his waist. The threat was not destroyed in a frenzy. It was absorbed, transformed, worn. Then a serpent, huge, heavy with venom, coils like a living storm. It struck. Shiva lifted it with a gentleness that should not be possible for something so dangerous. He placed it around his neck like a necklace. Time, death, poison. Made calm by contact with awareness that does not panic. Finally, the sages summoned a dwarf demon, armed and furious, the concentrated force of delusion itself. It charged, club raised, desperate to prove it could topple what it did not understand. Shiva stepped on its back, not to crush it into horror, but to pin it, to stop it from thrashing through the world unchecked. The demon struggled, but its struggle became part of the rhythm, like a child's tantrum becoming quieter when a steady hand rests on the shoulder. And then the dance began. At first it was slow, a shift of weight, a turn of the wrist, a tiny pulse of the drum. The forest listened, the fires listened. Even the sages, in spite of themselves, felt their breath change. The air seemed to hum. As the dance continued, light rose from Shiva's form, not harsh, not blinding, more like the glow you see when you close your eyes near a candle and the light becomes soft behind the lids. The elements responded. Water in nearby streams made spirals. Leaves trembled in patterns that felt like music. Earth steadied beneath the feet, as if the ground wanted to help. The sages had studied cosmic principles in words. Now they were watching those principles move. And the climax came with a gesture that always makes the story feel slightly impossible. As if the mind cannot quite hold it, Shiva lifted his left leg high, higher than any ordinary body should allow, a pose called the Udvata Tandava, balance so perfect it feels like a law of nature. In that moment, the grove filled with a blaze of recognition. The sages understood who stood before them. Their pride fell away fast, like ash blown from a hearth. They bowed, not because they were forced, but because their minds finally relaxed into reality. This is the strange mercy of the myth. The dark part is not the tiger, or the serpent, or the demon. The dark part is the pride that makes wise people forget humility. The soft part is that the correction comes through revelation, not cruelty. And while the forest settles back into hush, while the ritual fires become ordinary flames again, the story turns towards something even more delicate. Because after stillness and dance, after humility and revelation, comes love, and in love, the seeds of grief. We will go there next, gently, one footstep at a time, as if crossing a cold stone floor in the night, careful not to wake the whole house. Before we leave the grove, let me linger on one more image, because these stories love to hide their teaching in small physical details. There is a moment described in some tellings where Shiva's third eye seems to glow beneath a closed lid, not opening fully, just letting a thin line of awareness show itself. It is like when you wake in the night and do not move, but you know you are awake. The whole room is the same, yet everything is different because you are present inside it. And the drumbeat, the little pulse of the damaru, continues even when the dance grows fierce, even when it grows gentle. That steady rhythm is what keeps the myth from collapsing into chaos. It says, change can be intense, but it is not random. Some nights I picture 3 moods of the dance, moving across the same floor. Ananda, bliss, flowing like a slow smile. Rudra, correction, sharp as lightning far away, seen but not felt as danger when you are warm indoors. Lasya, nurturing, swaying like trees when spring finally touches the branches. All of them, different faces of the same motion. And above the dancer's head, the hair streams outward, catching dust and candle smoke. And in that wildness there is also care, because later the same hair will catch a river. Ganga will fall from the sky with too much force, and it will be Shiva who holds her in those tangled locks, letting the water split into gentle threads before it reaches the earth. I mention it now because the myth likes to remind you that the same being who can be fierce is also the one who makes things safe enough to touch. So yes, the sages learned. The forest learned. Even the air learned. And the listener, here by the fire, can learn something too, without effort. Your breath is your drum. Your exhale is your small dissolution. Your inhale is your small return. The grove of Tilai quiets again after the dance, the way a room quiets when someone closes a book. I like to imagine the sages sitting in the softened air, still feeling the vibration of those steps in their bones, still smelling the smoke of their own ritual fires now turned ordinary, like kitchen flame. Their pride has slipped off them, not with humiliation, but with relief. You know that feeling when you have been holding your shoulders up for too long, trying to look taller than you are, and then you finally let them drop. Then your neck stops aching. It is like that. Shiva does not linger to gloat. He never does in these stories. He teaches, and then he withdraws, returning to that strange balance between presence and absence, like the ember that glows in the hearth, even when the visible flame has stepped back. And yet the myth does not let us stay in the forest forever, because the deepest lesson is not only about sages and pride. It is about love, and love, as gentle as it can be, carries a shadow. Even the softest love has a place where it can break. So let us walk, slowly, away from Tilai and toward another scene where the air feels more formal, more crowded, more brittle. There is a being named Daksha. In the old telling, he is a Prajapati, a progenitor, a kind of cosmic organizer. He loves order. He loves protocol. He loves the clean line of hierarchy, the kind you could draw with a careful hand on a tablet of clay. His world is built on names and seating arrangements, and who bows first. He knows how to gather the powers of creation into ceremonies that look beautiful from a distance, like a city lit with lamps. And among his daughters is Sati. Her name means something like she who is, and it fits her, because she is described as steady, luminous, not easily swayed by the small games of status. From early on, her attention turns toward Shiva, not as a romance in the ordinary sense, but as a recognition, like hearing a note and realizing your body has been waiting for that note your whole life. Sometimes I picture her as a girl, sitting on the cool stone of her father's courtyard, listening to priests recite names, and yet her mind drifts to the mountains, wind, ash, the silence between breaths. She is surrounded by ornaments, by silk, by gold catching the light, and yet she prefers the simplicity of inward practice. She sits, she breathes, she lets the world fall quiet around her, like dust settling when you stop walking through it. Daksha does not like this. He imagines a marriage that strengthens alliances, a husband who will attend assemblies, smile politely, accept honors, keep the cosmic machinery running with good manners. Shiva is not that kind of being. Shiva wears ash. Shiva keeps company with beings the respectable world avoids. Shiva sits in places where life and death meet, not because he enjoys darkness, but because he refuses to pretend the dark does not exist. To Daksha, this feels like an insult to order itself, and to Sati, it feels like the only truth her heart will accept. So she practices tapasya. The word is austerity, a discipline that generates heat, not the heat of anger, but the heat of focus. She fasts. She sits through long hours when the sun moves across the sky and then disappears. She watches her thoughts rise and fall like small ripples on water. She learns to stay even when the body wants to move, even when the mind wants to chase distraction like a moth. The legends speak of her practice affecting the world around her. Mountains shimmering, rivers shifting their paths, air thick with a kind of quiet electricity. We cannot measure such things, and some scholars would say these are symbols rather than literal events. But the feeling is clear. Her devotion becomes a force. Eventually Shiva notices, not because he is flattered, and not because he is lonely, but because something in that devotion resonates with his own nature, like one flame recognizing another flame in the dark. Their meeting is described as instantaneous understanding, consciousness touching energy and recognizing itself. It is not a chase. It is not a conquest. It is a joining, like a river meeting the sea and realizing it was always headed there. Their marriage is spoken of as a cosmic event, not only gods attending, but elements. Earth as witness, water as blessing, fire as transformation, air carrying prayers, space making room. And if you were standing there, you might hear the soft clink of ornaments, the low hum of mantras, the crackle of sacrificial flame, and underneath it all, a deeper hush, because even celebration in these stories has a reverent edge, like people are afraid to wake the sleeping universe. For a while, Mount Kailash becomes a home. I want you to picture it, not as a palace, but as a place where weather is honest. Rock, snow, thin air that makes every breath feel precious. A dwelling carved by presence rather than by architecture. And inside it, in the dim glow of oil lamps, Sati and Shiva live in a kind of harmony that does not depend on polite society. Sati brings warmth, creativity, the domestic rhythm of life. Shiva remains still and vast, yet he is not cold. He is simply ungraspable. Together they are like the Ardhanarishvara image, made real, not half and half in one body, but two beings, moving as one principle. And that is when the tragedy begins to coil. Daksha's disapproval does not soften with time. It hardens. It becomes a quiet poison, the kind that does not announce itself. He hears the name Shiva and feels his throat tighten. He thinks of ash and skull bowls and untamed hair and feels his carefully arranged world threatened. He decides to perform a great yajna, a grand fire sacrifice. Invitations go out across the cosmic realms like birds carrying sealed messages. The ritual ground is prepared with obsessive care. The altar is built. The sacred woods are stacked. The offerings are gathered in shining bowls. The air smells of ghee and flowers and dry grass. And in the middle of all this, there is a deliberate absence. Shiva is not invited, not forgotten, excluded. It is a small cruelty in appearance, like leaving one name off a list, but it carries the weight of a blade. It is a public statement. You do not belong. When news reaches Kailash, the mountain air seems to sharpen. Sati hears it and feels a heat rise in her chest. Not the heat of tapasya this time, but something fiercer, an ache, an injustice. Because to insult Shiva is, to her, to insult the very consciousness that holds the world. It is like spitting into the river that gives you water. Shiva, in some tellings, remains quiet, not indifferent, but still. He does not rush to defend his honor through argument. He has never argued his case. He does not need to. But Sati cannot bear the imbalance. She decides to go to her father's ceremony anyway. And this is where the story takes on that dark, quiet feeling, like footsteps on a long corridor at night. Imagine her preparing. A lamp flame trembles as she passes, the soft rustle of cloth, the cool weight of jewelry that she may or may not choose to wear. I like to imagine she pauses with her hand on the doorframe, fingers touching wood worn smooth, taking one breath, as if she already knows this doorway is not only physical, it is a threshold in her life. She travels. Across distances the myth makes vast, through air that smells of pine and snow melting, past cliffs where wind whistles, down toward the more crowded world where ceremony lives. The closer she gets, the more she feels the density of other beings, the way a quiet mind can sense a noisy market before it sees it. At Daksha's ritual ground, fires blaze, priests chant, guests sit in orderly lines. It is bright with gold and polished surfaces, yet there is an undercurrent of tension, like a room where everyone is speaking politely while hiding sharp thoughts behind their teeth. When Sati arrives, some are uneasy, some look away, some look at her with pity, as if they already know what will happen. The air is thick with smoke and perfume. Dust rises under sandals and settles again, and at the center, Daksha stands with the pride of someone who believes order is the same as truth. Sati asks, in the way a daughter asks while still hoping for softness, why her husband has been excluded. Daksha answers with contempt. He speaks of Shiva as unclean, as improper, as unworthy of honor. He says these things publicly, in front of those gathered, and the insult lands like ash in water, turning clear devotion into a dark swirl. Sati's body becomes very still. Sometimes grief looks like movement. Sometimes it looks like stillness so deep it is frightening. She feels the old bond of daughterhood tear. She feels the bond of marriage blaze. Her breath grows steady in a way that is not calm, but determined. In the myth, she cannot accept the insult, not as a personal offense, as a cosmic violation. And so she chooses an ending that is also a beginning. The language around it is often intense, and I will keep it soft, because this is a night story, and you are safe. She turns inward. She gathers her own energy, the way a person gathers a shawl around their shoulders. The ritual fire crackles nearby. Candlelight and flame flicker across faces. There is a moment where time seems to thin, like cloth pulled tight. Sati releases her body. Some tellings say she enters the fire. Some say she ignites through her own inner heat. However it is described, the meaning is the same. She will not remain where truth is mocked. She will not let her father's pride use her as decoration. There is a hush, a sudden, terrible quiet, the kind that makes even the wind hesitate. News travels back to Kailash like a cold wave. Shiva receives it, and something in the cosmos changes. Grief in these myths is not only a private emotion. It becomes weather. It becomes tremor. It becomes the darkening of the sky. Shiva's stillness is disturbed, not in a frantic way, but in a vast way, like a glacier shifting. In some tellings, he lifts Sati's form and wanders, and the world cannot bear the weight of that sorrow. In others, he turns his face toward the injustice, and a fierce aspect emerges. Either way, the message is the same. When love is harmed, consciousness responds. From Shiva's matted hair, from that tangled storehouse of accumulated tapas and time, a warrior is born. Virabhadra. Picture the moment slowly. A strand of hair loosens. It falls like a dark thread in the air. The air around it thickens. Dust rises and hangs, as if the world is holding its breath. That single thread becomes the seed of form, gathering energy, the way clay gathers water when you need it. Then the warrior stands, tall, dark, eyes like stormlight, not cruel, not playful, simply purposeful, an instrument of correction. With him come the Ganas, Shiva's attendants, fierce in appearance, strange in shape, the kinds of beings you might see in a nightmare if you were alone. But here, they move like a disciplined tide, not random terror. They march to Daksha's yajna. The earth trembles under their footsteps. Birds fall silent. The fires on the altar flicker, as if unsure whether they are still in service of order or about to be returned to ash, and the ritual ground is undone. Not in a gleeful rampage, but in a precise unraveling. Priests are scattered. The carefully arranged offerings are toppled. The sacred fire is extinguished, smoke curling upward like a question that will not be answered. Daksha is confronted. His pride meets something it cannot bargain with. The story says his head is taken. A severing of arrogance, a removal of the false authority he clung to. Dark, yes, but even here, the myth does not end with endless punishment. Because Shiva's fierce energy is not meant to remain loose in the world. It is meant to correct, and then to quiet. The gods plead. They bow. They admit their complicity, their silence, their weakness. They ask for restoration. And Shiva, still grieving, still vast, allows compassion to rise. Daksha is brought back to life, but with a goat's head in many tellings, a symbol that humility must replace pride, and that once a lesson is learned, it should be remembered in the body, not only in the mind. The yajna ground becomes a place of rubble and ash. Smoke drifts, dust settles. The world feels emptied. And into that emptiness, a strange promise begins to form. Sati is not gone forever. Energy does not vanish, these myths insist. It changes shape, somewhere beyond the visible. In the hush after catastrophe, Sati prepares to return, not to repeat the tragedy, but to complete the bond. So, as the fires of Daksha's ceremony die down into gray, as the last embers cool, the story turns toward mountains again, toward snow and thin air, toward a newborn cry that will sound like a small bell in the vast silence. Parvati is coming. Let that be the gentle thread that carries you forward. Breathe in and out, and feel how even sorrow, in the end, becomes part of the rhythm, like ash becoming soil, like a river carrying silt and making a valley fertile. When I say her name, Parvati, I always hear it like the first sound of water in a dry place. After the yajna is broken, after Daksha's pride is reformed into something quieter, the story does not remain with rubble. It moves, as stories do, to a new cradle. Sati's essence travels into a different household, a household made of mountains. Her father in this incarnation is Himavan, the living spirit of the Himalayas. If you have ever stood near a great range of peaks, you know how a mountain feels like a presence rather than an object. It watches without judging. It holds snow like memory. It lets clouds gather and pass, and it does not hurry them. Her mother is Mena, softer, like the sheltered valley where water pools and rare flowers dare to bloom in a short season. Together they make a home that is both stern and tender. The way stone can be cold to the touch, and yet steady enough to hold you up. Parvati is born in that high country. The old tellings say the moment of her birth is marked by impossible blooming, springs waking, light changing its quality, as if the world remembers how to be beautiful after grief. We cannot prove the flowers opened all at once, and maybe the blooming is a symbol, but the feeling is clear. Her devotion becomes a force returning in a new shape. If you were standing there, you might hear not trumpets or loud celebration, but the quieter noises that matter. A mother's exhale, a newborn's tiny breath, the soft rub of cloth, the crackle of a fire built to keep the cold at bay, candlelight trembling on rock walls, making the cave or chamber feel like the inside of a lantern. As Parvati grows, she is different, not in a showy way, not in a way that demands attention, in the way she sits, the way she listens. Children often play and chase and shout, and she can do those things too. But there is a gravity in her, a depth behind her eyes that makes sages pause when they speak to her. Sometimes she sits by a mountain stream and watches the water move around stones. She watches the same leaf spin in a slow eddy and then drift away. She watches how silt settles, how the current keeps carrying what it carries. And in her chest, without a name for it yet, there is a longing that feels older than childhood. It is as if some part of her remembers smoke and insult and a sudden hush. She does not recall it as a story. She feels it as a pull. The pull points toward Kailash, toward Shiva. In adolescence, the pull sharpens. She asks visiting sages about the great ascetic in the high place. She asks about his stillness, his dance, his ash, his snakes, the river in his hair. Her questions are calm, but persistent, like water wearing a groove in stone. And then comes Narada, the wandering sage who appears in these myths like a wind that knows which doors to open. He sees the threads people cannot see. He arrives with his instrument, his voice, his mischievous warmth, and in the moment he looks at Parvati, he recognizes her. He does not say, "You were Sati." That would be too sharp, too heavy. A memory can be like a stone dropped into quiet water, splashing and stirring up mud. Instead, he tells stories. He tells of Shiva as Nataraja, the dancer whose foot keeps ignorance subdued without destroying it. He tells of Shiva as the silent teacher beneath a banyan tree. He tells of the pillar of fire that had no top and no bottom, and how Brahma and Vishnu searched for limits and found only their own humility. As Narada speaks, Parvati listens with a kind of still hunger. She feels the words landing in her like seeds. Some fall into a deep place, where they sprout immediately. Some take time, but all of them grow. And she chooses tapasya again. The discipline returns, but now it is sharpened into a single intention. Not romance alone. Reunion, completion, balance restored. She goes into the wild places where the air is thin and the cold makes the skin feel awake. She chooses a spot where the wind has carved the rock smooth, and she sits. At first, it is simple. Breath, stillness, the mind wandering and returning. She learns the weight of her own eyelids. She learns how a single thought can be as loud as thunder when everything else is quiet. Then her practice deepens. The old accounts describe her reducing her food, moving from fruit and roots to leaves, then to water, then to air itself. Whether we read this as literal or symbolic, the meaning is clear. She is shedding layers. She is thinning out the noise until only the essential remains. She sits through heat. She sits through cold. Snow gathers on her shoulders and melts, and gathers again. Birds perch nearby, fearless. A small animal might pause to sniff the air, then settle down as if she is a tree. Time stretches. This is where the story can feel eerie, because it suggests devotion so intense it begins to bend the world. The heat of her focus changes weather. Springs rise. The air glows faintly at night, as if her presence has become a lamp. And far away, in the more crowded realms, the gods begin to worry, because devotion, when it becomes a fire, does not always stay contained. The cosmic order is delicate. Too much heat in one place can tilt it. They look toward Shiva, but Shiva, after Sati's death, has returned to his deep meditation, withdrawing into stillness so profound that even prayers seem to fall against it like small pebbles against a cliff. The gods cannot shake him with ordinary sounds. They cannot shout him awake, so they turn to a different force, Kamadeva, the god of love, the one who carries a sugarcane bow strung with bees, the one whose arrows are made of flowers. In some ways, it is almost gentle, this image. A weapon that is not metal, not fire, but jasmine and mango blossom. And yet, love is a kind of power. It can soften a heart, and it can also undo a life. Kamadeva knows the risk. He approaches Kailash with caution, like someone walking across thin ice. With him comes spring, Vasanta, spreading subtle beauty along the path. A few flowers appear between stones. A breeze brings scent. Birds sing as if they have remembered something sweet. Shiva sits, unmoving. His spine is the line of a mountain ridge. His breath is so quiet it feels like the pause between waves. Ash rests on his skin like pale dust. His hair is piled high, containing the river, containing the moon, containing old time. Kamadeva draws his bow. The bees hum. The arrow is a small, bright thing. So delicate, you could imagine it breaking if it touched the wrong surface. It is meant to awaken recognition, not craving. It is meant to call Shiva back to the possibility of union. The arrow flies, and for a moment, the universe holds its breath. Even in this room, beside our own fire, you can feel the hush, can't you? That pause right before something changes. The arrow touches Shiva's heart center. There is a stir, not much, a subtle shift in the air. A fraction deeper breath, a hint of movement in the muscles around his mouth, as if a memory has brushed him from the inside. And then the stirring becomes too much, because what the arrow awakens is not only tenderness, it awakens grief. It awakens the old wound of Sati's loss, the kind of wound that was held in stillness, not healed, just held. Shiva's third eye opens. Light pours out, bright and absolute, not anger in the human sense, but an uncompromising clarity that burns away interference. Kamadeva is caught in that gaze. The story says he is reduced, his form gone in an instant, leaving absence where a being stood. It is a dark moment, not bloody, not graphic, just the sudden emptiness of a role removed from the cosmos. A chill, a silence after the bee's hum stops. And immediately there is panic, because without the force of love, how will creation continue? How will beings be drawn together? How will art be made? How will longing find its way into song? The gods plead again. They bow. They ask for restoration, for mercy, for balance. But the deeper consequence has already happened. Shiva has been awakened. And in his awakening, he recognizes what his own detachment has cost. He recognizes that union is not a distraction from ultimate truth, but one of its expressions. Consciousness and energy are not enemies, they are partners. His awareness turns toward the source of the devotion that has been shaking the mountains, toward Parvati. He tests her, in some tellings, appearing in forms meant to discourage her, a wandering ascetic, a voice that suggests Shiva is unworthy, a whisper that says, "Why choose ash and solitude?" Parvati does not waver. Her answer is not loud. It is steady, a quiet insistence that the truth of her heart is not a whim. It is a remembering. It is as if she has been walking toward one mountain her whole life, and now someone is asking her to turn around in the last few steps. Shiva sees that steadiness, and something softens in him. The wedding that follows is not only a celebration, it is a restoration of a cosmic principle. The world breathes again. I imagine the ceremony on Kailash with fewer polished ornaments than Daksha's yajna, and more raw beauty. Wind moving through prayer flags, snow reflecting moonlight, lamps sheltered in niches of rock, the scent of pine resin, of ghee, of crushed herbs, footsteps careful on stone, the low murmur of mantras that sound like river water over pebbles. The gods attend, chastened now, quieter. Even their brightness seems gentler, as if they learned something about humility from ash and loss. Parvati stands there, not as a girl seeking approval, but as Shakti, recognizing her place beside consciousness. Shiva stands with her, still vast, still strange, but now willing to be present in relationship without losing his freedom. And somewhere in the background of this moment, Kamadeva's absence is felt like a missing note. Yet the myths often say he is restored in a new way, unseen, existing without a visible body, a reminder that love can survive even when its usual form is burned away. It changes, it continues. As the ceremony ends, the mountain settles into a different kind of silence, not lonely, but shared. A home is made again in the high air, and you can feel, if you listen closely, that the story is not finished, because union brings consequences, because in a quiet household, in a chamber warmed by lamp and hearth, Parvati will soon feel a new desire, tender and ordinary, even for a goddess. The desire for a child to guard her door, to share her days, to be close. Before that, stay with Parvati in her tapasya a little longer, because this is where time can stretch in a gentle way. Night after night, she sits with her back against the mountain's patience. Her breath becomes visible, a pale ribbon that appears and vanishes, appears and vanishes. Wind slides down the slope and touches her cheeks, cold but honest. Sometimes it carries that clean scent of snow that makes the mind feel empty in a good way. She hears small sounds, pebbles settling, a distant crack where ice shifts, the soft wing beat of an owl passing, like a thought that does not need to stay. When she opens her eyes, the stars look sharp, like tiny points pressed into velvet. During the day, the light off the snow can sting. Her eyes water. She does not rush to wipe the tears. She lets them dry, salt on skin. Proof that a body can endure and still remain tender. And far away, the gods feel the change, the way a sensitive person feels a storm hours before it arrives. They gather in council, voices low, because they know they are dealing with forces that do not care about titles. In the end, necessity wins over hesitation, and Kamadeva is sent, not with confidence, but with careful dread, like carrying a candle through a room filled with dry cloth. After Kamadeva is burned, the world trembles and then adjusts. Longing does not vanish. It becomes quieter, more inward, as if love learns to move through the ribs without showing its face. When Shiva finally turns toward Parvati, there is a moment I always linger on. It is the moment before the wedding, when she steps aside alone for one breath. She touches rough stone, feels coolness under her fingertips, hears the faint hiss of oil in a lamp, and she remembers, without words, the other ceremony where she was insulted as Sati. This time, she chooses a different ending. This time, she chooses to stay. Hold that clean silence with me, just a little longer. So let your breathing stay slow. Let the room remain dim. Let the candle smoke curl and dissolve. And follow me, gently, toward the moment when clay and sandalwood paste will begin to take the shape of a small guardian with a heart full of devotion. Parvati's desire for a child arrives quietly, the way a new thought arrives, in meditation. It is not a demand, not a drama, just a soft ache for companionship, for a presence that belongs to her in the small hours when Shiva is deep in stillness, when the mountain is only wind and stone and the thin, patient hiss of a lamp. Shiva, as the stories tell it, returns often to long absorption. You can almost hear the household change when that happens. The air gets calmer, yes, but also emptier, as if a great bell has stopped ringing and left only its after silence. Parvati walks through their dwelling with bare footsteps on cold rock, feeling the texture of her own breath, watching candle smoke climb and disappear into shadow. And one day she thinks, I want a guardian at my door. I want a child. Honestly, I have always found it strange how tender the beginning of this story is, considering the darkness it will soon brush against. It starts like domestic life starts for anyone. A wish for help, a wish for closeness, a wish to feel less alone inside a vast world. So Parvati gathers what she has. Before she begins, she prepares the room the way you might prepare a mind for sleep. She lowers the lamps, until the corners blur. She nudges a candle closer to the fireplace so the flame can borrow warmth from the coals. She listens for the smallest sounds, because the smallest sounds tell you the truth about a place. The tiny crackle of resin in wood, the slow exhale of the mountain, the faint ringing in the ears that arrives when everything else becomes quiet. She washes her hands in cool water. The water smells faintly of stone, clean and ancient. She shakes off the droplets, and for a second they glitter in the candlelight like tiny stars falling. Only then does she take the bowl and the powders. Even the act of mixing becomes a kind of prayer. Her wrists move in a slow rhythm, round and round, like a moon tracing its path. The paste thickens, and she pauses just to feel its weight. It is heavy with intention, heavy with the idea of a life that is about to exist. There is a moment, always, before creation, when the mind could still turn away. Parvati does not turn away. Not gold, not weapons, simple substances that carry fragrance and warmth. Sandalwood paste, cool and creamy beneath her fingers. Turmeric, bright as a sunrise, powdering the air with its earthy scent. Oils that hold the memory of flowers. She mixes them slowly, palm against palm, feeling the paste resist, then soften, then become smooth, as if it is learning to be shaped. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the wet sound of paste being pressed, the quiet scrape when her nails catch the stone bowl, the small crackle of the fireplace as a log settles into a new position. You might even hear water dripping somewhere deeper in the mountain, a steady note like a distant clock. Parvati sits, and she forms a body. She does not rush. She presses the paste into limbs, and each limb becomes an opportunity to linger. A curve of shoulder, the hollow of a palm, the soft, rounded line where a child's cheek will be. She smooths the surface with a thumb that moves in slow circles, leaving a faint sheen that catches lamplight for a moment, then dulls as it dries. She gives him a chest that can hold devotion, a back that can stand firm, feet that will plant themselves with certainty. And while her hands work, her mind stays steady, not scattered, not distracted by the usual little flickers. Her intention is like a river channel, clear and deep. She is Shakti, and this is what she does. She turns possibility into form. When the shape is complete, she leans in close, as if telling a secret. She breathes life into him, not in a literal blowing, perhaps, but in that ancient mythic way where will and energy become a spark. The body warms. A subtle shimmer moves through the paste like dawn moving through fog. The child's eyelids flutter, not dramatically, just once, like a sleeping person responding to a sound. Then his eyes open. There is that first gaze, and it is always a tender thing to imagine. New awareness, new focus, the innocence of a being who has not yet learned fear, because fear is often learned from the reactions of others. He looks at Parvati and recognizes her. She recognizes him too, with a joy that feels almost human, almost ordinary. She touches his forehead, leaves a faint smudge of turmeric there, and smiles in the lamplight. This child is Ganesha, though the story has not yet given him the shape most people remember. For now, he is simply her son, her creation, her companion. She adorns him, not excessively, not with the showiness of a court. Simple ornaments, a cloth draped across the shoulder, a thread, a little bell that makes a soft sound when he moves. She teaches him the household rhythms, where the water sits, where the firewood is stacked, how to listen for Shiva's quiet return from meditation. And then she gives him a duty. Stand at my door, guard my privacy, let no one enter until I say so. Ganesha takes the instruction with complete sincerity. It is the kind of sincerity that can become dangerous later, but right now it is pure. A child who wants to please his mother, a child who wants to do what he was made to do. So he stands at the entrance to Parvati's inner chamber. The air is cool there. The stone beneath his feet holds the day's cold long after the sun has moved on. He feels the mountain breathing through tiny cracks. wind threading itself through the dwelling with a faint whistle. He stands and listens. Time passes in soft layers, footsteps from attendants far away, a bird calling once outside, the hiss of oil in a lamp, the distant rush of water. Then, after a long meditation, Shiva returns. The myth often describes this as a simple moment. Shiva approaches his home, and a child blocks his path. But if we slow it down, it becomes a whole atmosphere. Shiva's presence arrives before his form does. The air seems to deepen, like the room has drawn a longer breath. The ash on his skin holds the scent of cold places, of smoke and wind. His hair is heavy, piled high, and from it a faint dampness suggests the river that lives there, always flowing, always restrained. He walks with the quiet certainty of someone who has been alone in the inner sky for a long time. His thoughts are still resonant with vastness, with impersonal awareness. He is returning, and yet part of him is not fully in the domestic world yet. At the doorway, he finds a boy who looks at him calmly and says, "No, you cannot enter." In Shiva's mind, this is impossible. This is his home. This is his path. The resistance feels like a small stone in a river, irritating only because it is unexpected. In Ganesha's mind, it is simple. His mother gave an instruction. His body was formed for this loyalty. His duty is the shape of his love. So the words repeat. No, not now. The air tightens. There is no need to imagine shouting. The myth does not require it. It can be quiet and still, feel sharp, the way a blade can be sharp without making a sound. Shiva asks who he is. Ganesha answers with the confidence of a child. I am the one standing here. I am the guardian. Shiva's attendants, the Ganas, gather in the background, their forms half seen in the lamplight, like shadows that have learned to breathe. They do not like obstacles. They do not like a door closed to their lord. They attempt persuasion. They attempt force. The child does not move. And so the conflict begins. It is described as a battle, but in our telling, we can keep it dreamlike, almost symbolic. A struggle of wills, a storm of energy in a narrow space. Ganesha moves with surprising strength, as if the paste that formed him was mixed with devotion so intense it became muscle. He turns aside what comes at him. He holds his ground. Shiva, the destroyer, is not cruel, but he is decisive. He does not like stalemate. The universe itself is made of cycles, and he is the one who ends what must end. In the heat of the moment, he uses a force meant to clear obstacles. The story says Ganesha's head is severed. Let the image remain gentle, almost like a candle snuffed, rather than a violent scene. A sudden stillness, a collapse of movement. The boy's duty fulfilled to the last breath of his brief existence. And then the most human moment in the whole myth arrives. Parvati emerges. She steps out from her chamber, and the sight she meets stops her heart. The air around her changes. Warmth becomes fire. Grief becomes a power. Her love is not soft now. It is fierce, the way a mother's love can be fierce, the way a mountain can suddenly throw an avalanche without warning. She speaks, and the world hears. Her anger shakes the mountain. The gods tremble. The attendants freeze. Even Shiva feels the weight of what has happened, because now he understands. This was his child. His own hand, guided by impatience, has done something that cannot be undone in the same way it was done. Destruction is easy. Restoration is different. It requires care. Parvati demands the child be brought back, not as a request, as a necessity. Shiva's face, in my imagination, is very still in that moment. He does not defend himself with excuses. He recognizes the mistake. He recognizes that his vastness does not excuse blindness to relationship. So he promises to restore the boy. But the original head cannot be returned. The myth says it is gone, destroyed by the force that ended the battle. Death, once it happens, changes the world's shape. It leaves a hollow where something used to be. So Shiva sends his attendants out into the night. "Bring me the head of the first living creature you find," he says, "and do it gently." The Ganesha go. They move through the mountain's outer slopes, through pine shadows, through snow that crunches softly underfoot, through the hush of sleeping animals. The air smells of cold soil and resin. Stars watch with indifferent patience, and they find an elephant. In some tellings, it is a noble elephant, a being of unusual presence. In others, it is simply the first life they encounter. Either way, the elephant carries a symbolism that fits like a key: memory, wisdom, the strength to move through obstacles slowly, steadily, without panic. They take the head. We do not need to linger on the taking. Let it be like a transition in a dream, one form fading so another can be restored. They return to Kailash with the heavy offering, and the household is filled with a strange silence, the kind that comes when everyone knows something must be repaired, and no one knows how. The restoration is not quick. Shiva and Parvati prepare the space with the care of people rebuilding trust: a ring of ash, a bowl of water that reflects a trembling flame, flowers placed one by one, each petal a small act of patience. When the Ganas return with the elephant head, everyone goes quiet. It is the quiet of accepting that what returns will be changed, and that love will have to be wide enough to hold the change. Shiva and Parvati stand together, and this is important. It is not Shiva alone. It is not Parvati alone. Restoration requires both consciousness and energy, again, working as one. They place the elephant head upon the child's body. They speak mantras that are not mere words, but vibrations, the kind that make the air feel thick, the kind that make the lamp flame bow. They guide life back into the form, stitching spirit to flesh, with intention, with breath, with a patience Shiva is learning in this very moment. Slowly, awareness returns. The child inhales. A deep breath, fuller than before. The chest rises. The candle's smoke trembles as if responding to the return of life. His eyes open. Now the face is different. The head is larger. The ears are broad. The trunk rests like a gentle question. And yet, the consciousness inside is still the child who guarded the door. Still loyal. Still clear. Parvati's grief loosens its grip. Not fully, but enough to allow breath. She touches his cheek, now an elephant's cheek, warm beneath her palm. She feels the texture, the new skin, the new shape. Shiva bows, in his way, not with theatrical apology, but with recognition. He honors the boy's devotion and declares him worthy of reverence. Ganesha becomes the remover of obstacles, the Lord of beginnings, the one invoked before every journey, because he knows what it is to be an obstacle and what it is to be transformed. And perhaps that is the soft lesson here, an ending that becomes a beginning, a mistake that becomes wisdom, a door that is guarded, then opened, then guarded again, but with more understanding. As the household settles, the night wind returns to its usual quiet. The fireplace crackles. Dust floats through the lamplight. Water drips somewhere deeper in the rock. The mountain breathes. And in the distance, beyond this domestic chamber, a larger danger begins to stir. A demon with a boon that makes him almost invincible, and gods who will soon come again to Kailash, begging for a son of Shiva. Let your breathing stay slow as we walk toward that next shadow, where a warrior will rise from sacred waters, carrying a spear that shines like a calm star. After the return of Ganesha, the household on Kailash changes in a subtle way. There is more movement now, small footsteps, a bell's soft note, the sense that a door is watched not by fear, but by devotion. Parvati's daily life feels less solitary, even when Shiva sinks back into meditation. There is a companion nearby, a presence who looks at her with unquestioning trust. And still, beyond the mountain, the universe keeps turning. A crisis grows the way a storm grows, quietly at first, then with a pressure that cannot be ignored. The demon is named Tarakasura. In the old stories, he is not simply a monster for the sake of being a monster. He is a force that has learned to use discipline, to use tapasya, to gather power the way a drought gathers heat. He performs austerities, and the heat of his practice rises into the cosmic realms like smoke. Brahma grants him a boon. He will not be killed by gods. He will not be killed by ordinary weapons. Only a son of Shiva can end him. It is a clever protection, because Shiva is the eternal ascetic. Shiva, after Sati, had withdrawn. Shiva is not supposed to have sons. Tarakasura builds his confidence on that assumption. And with confidence comes aggression. The gods suffer. Their realms are pressured. Their rhythms disturbed. The balance between order and chaos begins to tilt. So they come quietly to Kailash. I imagine them approaching like travelers in deep snow, each step careful, each breath visible, their bright forms muted by the mountain's stern air. They carry offerings, but they also carry fear, because they know they are asking the impossible. They are asking the one who prefers stillness to step into necessity. They ask Shiva to father a son. Before they dare to ask Shiva for a son, the gods try another path. They look at Shiva on the mountain and think, he is too still, too deep. How do you awaken someone who can sit through an age the way you sit through a single exhale? So they send Kama, the god of desire. Kama does not arrive with a roar. He arrives with perfume, with spring air, with the subtle coaxing that makes frozen ground soften. He carries a bow made of sugarcane and arrows tipped with flowers, because desire rarely feels like a weapon at first. It feels like sweetness, like curiosity, like a gentle leaning toward life. He steps carefully into Shiva's vicinity, where the air is so clear it almost hurts. He hears the faint drip of water from ice. He sees ash on stone. He senses the huge quiet that surrounds Shiva like a cloak. Kama aims, not to harm, but to stir, to make Shiva look up from meditation, to make him notice Parvati in a new way. The arrow of longing flies, silently. For a brief moment, it seems to work. Parvati's presence feels brighter. The world feels warmer. Even the wind sounds different, like it is carrying music from far away. And then Shiva opens his eyes. There is a gaze in that myth, a gaze that is not angry in the human sense, but absolute. It is the gaze of awareness seeing manipulation, seeing a plan, seeing a disturbance introduced into stillness. From the center of Shiva's forehead, the third eye opens. It is not a dramatic spectacle if we keep it quiet. Imagine instead a sudden, intense clarity that burns through illusion the way sunlight burns through fog. Kama, caught in that clarity, cannot remain as he was. The myth says he is reduced to ash. Let the image be soft, a scattering, a fading. A lesson about how even desire, when used as a tool rather than honored as a natural force, can vanish. Kama's wife, Rati, grieves. The gods feel shame. Parvati feels a complicated ache because she sees the cost of their interference, and yet she also carries her own longing, which is not an interference at all. It is simply life asking for life. Shiva, after that moment, is even more withdrawn, and the gods realize nothing can be forced here, not even for cosmic survival. Only love that is patient can change this mountain. So Parvati does what she always does. She waits, she tends, she practices. She sits near Shiva in silence, letting her breath match his breath, letting the air around them become one shared atmosphere. Day after day, night after night, candle smoke after candle smoke, and slowly Shiva returns to her. not as a conquest, not as a victory, as an opening. Shiva is silent, not because he refuses out of spite, because his consciousness rests in a place beyond personal involvement, a place where the universe looks like a passing cloud. Parvati understands the need. She also understands the cost. She has already seen what love can awaken in Shiva and what love can burn away. Still, cosmic order is a delicate thing. When it is threatened, even the highest consciousness must respond, at least in some form. In some tellings, the solution comes through union, through the renewed bond between Shiva and Parvati. In others, it comes through Shiva's own accumulated spiritual energy, becoming so intense it cannot remain contained. I like the second image for the way it feels, almost like weather inside a body. Shiva meditates, and the tapas of his practice grows hotter, not a frantic heat, a slow, steady heat, like coals that have been burning for a long time. The air around him shimmers. Snow near his seat melts in a perfect ring and then refreezes. The stars above seem to flicker. The gods notice the intensity, and they are afraid it will ignite the fabric of the world. So they do something careful. They gather that blazing essence. Imagine them holding it the way you would hold a coal with tongs, not wanting to touch it directly, not wanting to drop it either. The essence is not just fire. It is concentrated consciousness, the potency of Shiva's stillness turned into a force. They carry it to a lake, a sacred lake, the kind described as formed from ancient tears, a place where water holds memory and can cool what is too intense, can cradle what would otherwise burn through everything. The lake lies in a grove, and the grove is quiet. Trees stand like witnesses. The air is damp and fragrant, carrying the smell of moss, wet earth, leaves. The surface of the water is dark and reflective, like polished stone. When the essence is carried toward the sacred lake, the journey itself feels like a procession through a dream. The devas walk in measured steps. Their feet barely touch the ground, and still the earth seems to notice them. Leaves tremble as they pass. Dew shifts on grass blades. Even the insects go quiet, as if listening. The vessel holding Shiva's energy is not a simple cup. It is a containment of something that does not want to be contained. The light inside it pulses, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Sometimes it flares, and the carriers pause, closing their eyes, breathing until the flare settles again. At the lake's edge, they kneel. Water smells like moss and old stone. The surface is so still it reflects the stars with perfect accuracy, as if the sky has fallen into the earth and decided to rest there. They lower the essence to the water. At first, there is nothing, just a faint warmth spreading outward, as if someone has poured tea into a cold bowl. Then the ripples begin, widening in perfect rings. Each ring carries a shimmer, not quite color, not quite fire, something between moonlight and embers. The reeds at the shore sway, though there is no wind. The air thickens with a gentle hum, and deep below the surface, a light awakens. When the essence meets the water, the lake responds. Light rises from below, as if the water has lit a lamp under its own skin. Lotus flowers open, not with loud color, but with a steady unfolding, petals separating the way. A slow breath separates ribs. The air vibrates with a tone you can feel more than hear. And from the center, something emerges. Kartikeya, Murugan, Skanda. The names shift across regions and centuries, but the figure is the same. A warrior born of necessity, raised by love, carrying the calm focus of a being who knows his purpose. The story says he has 6 faces, 12 arms, an ability to see in every direction. We can hold that image gently as symbolism for awareness that does not get surprised. A warrior who does not fight with blind rage but with clear perception. His skin gleams with a golden radiance, like sunlight caught in a shallow stream. His eyes are steady, not cruel, determined, and he is not alone. The Kritikas, the 6 divine mothers, gather him to their chests. Their arms are warm, their voices soft. They feed him, not only with milk in the mythic sense, but with steadiness, with the balance that keeps power from becoming arrogance. I always like to linger here, because it is one of the rare moments in these darker myths where nurture is explicitly shown. A warrior being raised with tenderness, a spear being placed in a hand that is also taught restraint. His weapon is the spear, the vel. It is described as able to pierce any defense, but in a quieter reading, it is the ability to pierce delusion, to cut through what is false, to end a threat, not out of personal hatred, but out of service. When he is ready, he rides a peacock. Such a strange, beautiful detail. A bird that eats poisonous creatures, a bird that turns what could harm it into nourishment, feathers that flash with color in sunlight, and yet the bird's call can sound almost mournful at dusk. It is like the myth is reminding us that even victory has a bittersweet note. Kartikeya grows quickly, as divine children often do in these tales. The world needs him. There is no time for long childhood. The gods rally behind him, and the battle with Tarakasura is told as a great conflict. We can keep it in the distance, like thunder heard from inside a safe room. We can speak of it as the collision of forces rather than gore, the clash of boons, the pressure of cosmic law meeting the cunning of a demon. Kartikeya confronts the demon, and in the end, the boon's condition is fulfilled. A son of Shiva ends Tarakasura. Balance returns, at least for a time. But Shiva's nature, the stories remind us, is not only the gentle father who allows sons to be born through necessity. He is also the fierce corrector, the storm that clears the air when it becomes too heavy. After Daksha's insult and Sati's loss, we already saw Virabhadra, born from hair and grief. Now the myth widens and speaks of other fierce forms, the Rudras, aspects of destruction that are not pointless cruelty, but targeted purification. It can sound frightening, and yet there is something oddly comforting in the idea that stagnation does not last forever, that false authority eventually collapses, that arrogance is not immortal. Kapali, smeared in ash, carrying a skull bowl, exposing hypocrisy. Pingala, burning through self-deception with heat, and others, each a kind of cosmic medicine that tastes bitter but cures a deeper sickness. Some scholars interpret these as symbolic, not literal beings marching around. Others accept them as divine manifestations. Either way, the psychological truth is familiar. When the mind clings to pride, something eventually breaks it. When a society grows rigid, something eventually cracks it. When a person refuses to change, life finds a way to change them anyway. Shiva embodies that inevitability. And yet, notice how the myth keeps pairing fierceness with stillness. After every storm, there is a return to quiet. After every act of dissolution, there is space for renewal. So let us come back to the hearth for a moment. Imagine Shiva again, in meditation, his breath regulating cosmic winds, Parvati beside him, watching the lamp flame, listening to Ganesha's small movements in another room. Kartikeya, somewhere beyond, a warrior now, but once an infant held by 6 mothers by a dark lake. The household is full of contrasts, ash and turmeric, silence and a child's bell, snow outside and fire inside, a door guarded by devotion, and a universe guarded by transformation. And in the far distance, another story begins to stir, one that touches the boundary between devotion and death itself. A young sage named Markandeya, whose love for Shiva will be so complete that even the Lord of Death will have to pause. After the victory, the universe exhales. You can imagine it like a room after a long argument. The air is still, but it is softer. The tension that had been lodged in corners begins to loosen. The gods offer gratitude, and gratitude in these myths often comes with rituals. Lamps lit in rows, bells rung, hymns that echo against temple walls. But Kartikeya does not linger in celebration. His eyes remain watchful, as if he knows that every calm season is followed by another test. He returns, at least in spirit, to Kailash, not to become a child again. That cannot happen. But to stand near the hearth where his story began, to let Parvati's hand touch his brow for a moment, to let Shiva's silent approval rest on him like a cloak. Ganesha listens from the doorway, his elephant ears catching every shift in tone, every unspoken feeling. Two brothers, born of necessity, shaped by loss and protection, existing like two different kinds of guardians in the same house. And as they stand in that quiet, you can sense another figure moving at the edge of the cosmic room. Yama, the Lord of Death, not as a villain, but as law, as the keeper of time's boundary. In the next tale, a boy's devotion will meet that boundary, and something astonishing will happen, something that makes even inevitability pause, just for a breath. We will walk toward that tale slowly, as if following the sound of a river through darkness, step by step, breath by breath, letting the night stay soft around you. The next story arrives like a quiet knock in the middle of the night, not loud, not rude, just a presence at the edge of the firelight, asking to be let in. His name is Markandeya. In the old telling, he is a boy, a young sage whose devotion to Shiva is not something he performs for anyone else, not a display for crowds or temples, but a private rhythm, like breathing, like the soft press of prayer beads between finger and thumb. If you were standing here with me, you would notice how the air around him feels steady, as if the world has agreed to speak more softly in his presence. He lives with a simple routine: water drawn from a stream at dawn, ash traced lightly on the forehead, a lamp lit with oil that smells faintly of sesame and smoke. He sits before a small lingam, not grand, not covered in gold, only stone, cool to the touch, a shape that refuses to be fully described, because Shiva, in these stories, is always a little beyond what the mind wants to hold. Markandeya chants. The chant is not a shout. It is a murmur that blends with the sounds of a waking forest, birds calling once, then falling silent again, leaves turning in wind, a distant river breathing against its banks. And in the background, unseen but always present, time continues its work. In the myth, Markandeya is marked for an early death. Some versions say his lifespan is short by destiny, that his parents were told he would live only 16 years. Other tellings soften the number or treat it as symbolic. We cannot be sure. And that uncertainty is part of why the story feels so eerie, because even when details shift, the center remains the same. A devoted child, a fixed date, a force that arrives to collect what time claims. If you have ever felt your own birthday approaching with a strange quietness, you know the feeling, not fear exactly, more like the awareness that days are beads on a string, and the string does not last forever. Markandeya grows, and the day approaches. When it arrives, it comes like any other day at first. Dawn is pale. The air is cool. The stone floor beneath his knees holds the night's chill. Candle smoke rises in a thin column and breaks apart when a draft slips through the doorway. He sits before the lingam and feels something in the air, a pressure. Like a storm far away, Yama comes. I always imagine Yama not as a monster, but as a solemn official, the keeper of a cosmic boundary, the one who does not hate you, the one who simply does the job that keeps the universe honest. In some depictions, he rides a buffalo. In others, he arrives with the sound of a bell that no one else hears. His presence is heavy and clean, like iron cooled in water. He brings a noose, a loop that represents the inevitability of endings, the way a river eventually meets the sea. When Yama appears at the edge of the grove, the world becomes strangely still. Even insects pause. The air thickens. Markandeya's breath remains calm, but his heart knows, not panic. Recognition. He does not run. He leans closer to the lingam. This is the dark tenderness of the myth. A child choosing refuge, not in walls or weapons, but in devotion. He wraps his arms around the stone, cheek pressed to its cool surface. The ash on his skin leaves a faint pale mark. He chants, and the chant becomes softer, more intimate, like a whisper shared with someone you love. Yama steps forward and casts the noose. The loop flies through the air, and in the story, it catches Markandeya. But it also touches the lingam. It slips around both, because the child is clinging so closely that the boundary between devotee and deity has become thin. And that detail matters, because in that moment, the myth says, the distinction dissolves. An attack on the devotee becomes an attack on Shiva. The air changes, not with noise, with presence. A sudden pressure, as if the mountain itself has stood up. Shiva emerges, not in his gentlest form, but as Kalantaka, the one who ends death's authority when death overreaches. I want you to picture it slowly, so it does not become frightening. Imagine a shadow rising behind the lingam, tall and calm, ash like stardust on blue skin, hair like a dark river held in knots, eyes steady. The third eye not blazing wildly, but open enough to show that awareness is awake. Shiva's hand lifts. The noose is stopped. Yama's certainty wavers, not because he is weak, but because he is meeting something older than his law, something that holds time the way a palm holds a small seed. The confrontation is described in different ways. Some say Shiva strikes Yama. Some say he pins him beneath a foot, like the demon of ignorance pinned beneath Nataraja's dance. Others interpret it as a symbolic correction. Death is reminded that it serves consciousness, not the other way around. However it is told, the mood is the same. A boundary is enforced, not to erase death forever, but to show that devotion can change how death behaves. That there are moments, rare and mysterious, when the ordinary mechanism pauses, as if listening. Markandeya remains alive. He loosens his grip on the lingam only when the air becomes light again, when the grove resumes its soft sounds, when a bird dares to call. Yama withdraws, not in humiliation, but in recognition of hierarchy. And Shiva, in that fierce form, turns his gaze to the child, and the gaze feels like a blessing, heavy with quiet. If there is a lesson here, it is not that you can bargain with time. It is that you can rest inside something deeper than time. Now, breathe with me. Inhale slowly, as if drawing warmth from the fireplace. Exhale, and feel your shoulders soften. The myth is dark because it touches the edge, the place where life meets its ending. And yet it is also soothing, because it says the edge is not the final truth. From that tale of death and devotion, the stories move back to water, always water, because water is the gentlest teacher of transformation. It does not argue. It shapes stone anyway. And there is a story where even water, if it falls too hard, becomes catastrophe. This is the descent of Ganga. The river begins in the celestial realms, not as a simple stream, but as a force, a divine current, full of purity, full of momentum, full of power that could overwhelm earth if it arrived without restraint. A king, Bhagirath, prays for her descent to cleanse his ancestors, a lineage caught in ash and unresolved fate. He performs austerities for so long that time feels thin around him. He sits on stone that warms under the sun by day and cools under stars by night. Dust settles on his shoulders. Leaves fall near his knees. The seasons turn, and he remains. His breath becomes the only movement that matters. At last, Ganga agrees to come, and the moment she begins her descent, The sky seems to change its mind. Clouds gather, and then part. Light becomes sharper. The air fills with a sound like distant rain, but deeper, like an ocean turning in sleep. The gods worry. They imagine her force striking earth and tearing it open, flooding continents, washing away villages, temples, memories. So they go to Shiva. Only Shiva can catch her. Only his matted hair, tangled with ages of meditation, can serve as a net for a river that is also a divine principle. Shiva stands at the place where sky and mountain meet, and he does not move. His hair is piled high, dark and heavy, and in it, the crescent moon rests, like a cool thought, a counterbalance to heat. Serpents coil without fear. The air around him smells of ash, stone, and the faint sweetness of distant pine. Ganga falls. The descent is not a trickle. It is a roar. But we can hear it from far away, like you hear thunder through a closed window. A great force rushing downward, full of brightness that does not burn. She strikes Shiva's hair. The impact is immense, and yet the hair holds. It catches her the way a forest catches wind. It breaks her force into countless small currents, twisting her momentum into spirals, turning catastrophe into flow. For a long while, Ganga is trapped there, held in the maze of locks, her pride testing the restraint, her energy seeking release. But Shiva is patient. He has been patient since before time had a name. Little by little, he lets her out. A regulated stream, a river that can be touched by human hands without destroying them, a water that can cleanse without washing away the world. Ganga emerges from Shiva's hair and runs down the mountain, and wherever she goes, the air feels cooler, cleaner. The dust settles. The earth seems to relax. Bhagirath guides her, and the ancestors are released. Ash becomes passage. A dark fate becomes a quiet opening. And still, the myth does not let us linger too long in comfort, because there is another substance that rises from the deep. Not water, but poison. Hala. It appears during the churning of the primordial ocean. Gods and demons work together, pulling a serpent like a rope around a mountain, trying to bring forth nectar, trying to gain immortality. The ocean yields treasures, and then it yields something that should have remained hidden, a poison, so intense it threatens all life. The air becomes bitter, the vapor spreads. Even the gods feel fear, because fear is natural when the world's breath is contaminated. No one can contain it, not with rituals, not with weapons. So once again, they come to Shiva. Shiva does not hesitate. He takes the poison. This is one of those moments where myth becomes almost painfully human. The idea of someone swallowing what no one else can handle, taking into themselves the crisis, so others can keep breathing. Shiva holds the poison in his throat. He does not let it sink into the heart, because then it would spread. He contains it with yogic mastery, with the calm control that comes from a mind that does not flinch. His throat turns blue, a mark that remains, a reminder that saving the world leaves traces. He becomes Neelkanth, the blue-throated one, and the universe continues, because that is what Shiva does. He transforms, he contains, he dissolves what must be dissolved, so new life can rise like steam from warm water. As I sit here beside the fireplace, I find it comforting in a strange way. Not because I wish for poison, not because I wish for death's visit, but because the stories keep repeating the same quiet pattern. When something threatens to flood you, it can be caught, slowed, guided. When something threatens to poison you, it can be held, contained, transformed. When something threatens to end you, devotion can place you in a deeper shelter. Now, let the room be dimmer. Let your jaw soften. Feel the weight of your body resting, supported, as if the earth itself has decided to hold you without question. In the next part, we will drift toward the last great shadow in Shiva's mythology, the ultimate dissolution, the Mahapralaya, where even stars dim and the universe returns to its first silence. And then, as always, something waits in the dark, not fear, but the calm promise of renewal. Before we move on, stay with me in the small spaces between these tales. Picture Markandeya's cheek against the cool stone, the tiny pits in the lingam beneath his fingers, the way candle smoke curls and then vanishes. He does not argue with the universe. He simply holds on, and that is sometimes the bravest kind of prayer. With Ganga, imagine Shiva's hair as a patient labyrinth, breaking a single violent fall into many gentle streams, translating overwhelm into flow. And with Hala Hala, let the image remain symbolic, not graphic. A bitterness rising from the deep, a vapor that makes every being remember the value of breath. Shiva takes it, holds it in the throat, and the world exhales again. In the next part, we drift toward the widest silence of all, when the universe itself loosens its grip and returns to stillness. Let that idea settle like dust in a beam of firelight. Sometimes stories like these can make the mind want to sit up, to check the door, to count the locks, to rehearse what it would do if fate approached with footsteps. But you do not have to do that tonight. You can listen the way you listen to rain, present, but not pulled into it. If you notice your thoughts tightening, imagine a small museum room, late at night, empty, with a hush that feels almost holy. Imagine a single display case holding a smooth stone, a fragment of old script, a bowl that once held water for a lamp. No alarms sounding, no crowds, only the soft hum of air, the slow breath of the building. Your mind can become that room, spacious, quiet, safe enough. Inhale and feel the air cool at the nostrils. Exhale and feel it warm as it leaves. Again and again, until the rhythm is the only thing you need to hold. Because the myths are not trying to push you into fear. They are trying to show you how even fear can be carried, how even endings have a shape that can be met with steadiness, and how every collapse, when it finally comes, can be a kind of return. The last stretch of our night is the quietest one. The fire has settled into a low, steady pulse. Candlelight leans against the walls and makes them look older than they are. If you were sitting here with me, you might notice how even the air feels slower, as if time has agreed to loosen its belt and let you rest. And that is fitting, because the final myths around Shiva always turn toward the same direction, toward what remains when everything else lets go. We have met him as the still one on the mountain, the dancer in the forest, the husband in grief, the fierce protector, the one who holds poison at his throat, the one who catches a river in his hair. Now we meet him as the teacher of silence, Dakshinamurti. The name itself feels like a whisper, the south-facing one, the teacher who does not lecture. In the old image, he sits beneath a banyan tree, the kind of tree with roots that hang down like slow ropes, touching earth, growing into new trunks, as if the tree refuses to accept that it must be only one body. The ground beneath is packed dirt, cool in the shade. There is a faint smell of sap and leaf mold, and the dry sweetness of wood. 4 sages sit nearby. They are old, and their age is not mocked. It is honored. Their backs carry decades of study. Their faces hold the lines of long concentration. They have listened to hymns, argued philosophy, memorized scriptures, chased truth through language the way a child chases birds across a field. And yet they have come to this quiet place because something in them has finally grown tired of words. Dakshinamurti looks young. That is one of the classed, unsettling beauties of the symbol. Wisdom wearing a face that seems untouched by time, not to tease the elders, but to show that awareness itself does not age the way bodies do. He does not speak. He raises one hand in a mudra, a small arrangement of fingers, thumb touching index finger, a circle made of flesh and silence, cosmic and personal, the vast and the intimate, the one meeting itself. The sages watch. At first their minds do what minds do. They interpret, they name, they compare. Then, slowly, the interpretation drains away, like water seeping into sand. And something else happens. A recognition, not an achievement, not a trophy, not a new piece of information to carry home, but a simple noticing that what they have been seeking is the very awareness doing the seeking. It is strange how soft that can feel, like finally noticing your own breathing after hours of forgetting it. In some versions, the sages awaken instantly. In others, the moment is slower, like dawn filling a room. Either way, the teaching is the same. Silence can transmit what language cannot hold. I have always found it calming, honestly, because it suggests you do not have to solve everything tonight. You do not have to pin meaning down with nails. You can let the mind become quiet enough for something simpler to be felt. Now, from that silent teaching, the stories drift back to an object you might have noticed in Shiva's hand so many times that it begins to feel familiar. The trident, 3 points, in one line of interpretation. Those points represent the 3 qualities that shape the world: clarity, activity, heaviness; sattva, rajas, tamas; harmony, motion, rest. The way a day holds morning brightness, midday movement, and night's slow pull toward sleep. In another telling, the 3 points are past, present, and future, all held together in one grip, or creation, preservation, dissolution, or body, mind, and the witness behind both. It is debated which meaning is primary, and I like that it is debated because it keeps the symbol alive. It refuses to be captured by a single sentence. Still, the feeling is consistent. Balance. A reminder that destruction is not a tantrum, it is a function, a clearing, a release. And as we reach the end of these myths, that release becomes vast. Mahapralaya, the great dissolution. If the earlier stories were about a single life, a single grove, a single poison, this one is about the universe itself returning to its first quiet. It begins gently, not with explosions, not with screaming skies, but with subtle signs that only the sensitive notice, a cooling in the spiritual atmosphere, as if the world's pulse is slowing. Stars dim a little, not all at once, but as if someone has turned the wick down on a million distant lamps. Planets feel tired, not in a tragic way, more like a long day ending. Winds lose their sharpness. Seasons become less certain. Creatures pause more often, staring into nothing, as if hearing a far-off call. Even the gods, who seem so permanent in earlier tales, begin to sense the turn. Their radiance softens. Their ambitions fall quiet. Their arguments lose flavor. They look inward. It is as if the entire cosmos is inhaling, preparing to exhale everything it has been holding for ages. And Shiva rises into his final dance. Not the dance that keeps the universe in motion, but the dance that lets the motion end. Try to picture it without fear. Imagine a master artisan dismantling a lantern after a festival, carefully unhooking the paper, folding the frame, saving what can be saved, returning the rest to the earth. No violence, just completion. Shiva's form expands beyond the scale of mountains, beyond the scale of worlds. The drum in his hand is not a musical instrument now, but a command of rhythm, each beat marking a phase of return. First, life loosens, not as punishment, but as release. Seeds stop striving. Creatures grow sleepy. The urge to multiply fades. It is a strange mercy, a cosmic easing, like the body naturally turning towards sleep when it has done enough for one day. Then, matter loosens, bonds soften. The solidity of stone becomes less stubborn. Mountains become patient dust. Oceans lose their edge. The world's elements remember that they were never meant to be trapped in form forever. Fire rises, but it does not burn like ordinary fire. It consumes distinctions. It dissolves the borders between layers of reality, material, vital, mental, even the subtle architecture of time itself. Past and future fold toward the present until the present becomes wide and still. The serpents that adorn Shiva move in slow coordination, not as threats, but as the embodiment of timing. The great serpent at his neck feels like a quiet clock, not ticking, but holding the correct order of the return. And one by one, beings surrender their shapes, not in terror, in recognition. That detail matters to me, because it shifts the mood of the ending. The myth is not a horror story about annihilation. It is a story about letting go of what was temporary and finding that what remains is strangely peaceful, like slipping out of heavy clothes at the end of a long journey, like laying down a burden you forgot you were carrying. Eventually, space itself collapses into potential. Time becomes meaningless. The dance becomes so subtle, it is no longer movement at all, only awareness resting in itself. And in that final hush, you can sense the paradox the ancients kept pointing to. The end is not an end. It is a clearing, a still point where new beginnings wait, not rushed, not forced, simply present as possibility. Some traditions call that presence Shiva, the eternally auspicious one, the guarantee that consciousness does not vanish, that it continues, that it plays, that it explores new forms when the time is right. And there is another softness in Shiva's mythology that often gets overlooked when people focus only on his ferocity, his conversations. Because sometimes the deepest teaching is not delivered in a battlefield or a cosmic spectacle, but in a quiet room, in the gentle intimacy of two beings speaking like partners who have shared too much time to bother with pretense. Shiva and Parvati sit together on Mount Kailash, not always as statues, sometimes as a couple, in the simplest sense, two presences beside one another, feeling the cold, clean air of high altitude, listening to wind skimming along rock, watching snow settle and melt and settle again. A lamp burns low. The flame makes a tiny sound when it leans. Somewhere far below, a river murmurs in the dark. Parvati asks questions, not because she is ignorant, the myths insist, but because she is drawing out methods for all the rest of us. The way a skilled friend asks the question you were too shy to ask. How does a person trapped inside a small life recognize the vast? How does the mind stop biting its own tail? How does awareness rest? Shiva answers with techniques. Some texts say 112. That number is famous and debated, and sometimes treated as symbolic. But the feeling of it is what matters. An abundance of doorways, a refusal to insist there is only one path. He speaks of breath, not as an object to control harshly, but as a bridge, a simple rising and falling that you can feel right now, without effort. He suggests noticing the pause after an inhale, that tiny stillness where nothing is happening, and yet you are fully here. He suggests noticing the pause after an exhale, the soft emptiness that feels almost like a small death, and then the gentle return. He speaks of listening, the way sound arrives and disappears without asking permission. Water, wind, even the hum inside your own ears. And beneath it all, the silence that never leaves. If you listen long enough, the silence begins to feel like a home you forgot you owned. He speaks of sight, candle flame, star, watching without grabbing, letting the eyes soften so the world becomes less sharp, more like a painting, more like a dream, and then noticing the one who is watching. He speaks of thought, not as an enemy, but as weather, clouds that pass. The mind does not have to be punished for being a mind. It only has to be seen, and in the seeing, something loosens. Sometimes he says it in the simplest way. Who are you? Beneath every name, beneath every role, beneath every story you tell yourself. The question is not meant to be answered with words. It is meant to create a small clearing. Those teachings are not separate from the dark myths. They are the medicine inside the darkness. Because when the universe dissolves, when relationships break, when death approaches, What remains is the same thing those techniques point toward, the witness that can hold everything without being destroyed by it. Even Ravana, the proud king with too many heads and too much hunger, touches that truth for a moment. He worships Shiva with fierce devotion. The stories say he offers what is dearest to him, even his own heads, a gesture so extreme it makes the skin of the myth tingle with danger. And Shiva, who does not need flattery, appears anyway, because sincere devotion, even when tangled with ego, can still be a doorway. Ravana composes a hymn, the Tandava Stotra, a praise of Shiva's dance. It is full of thunder and ornament, yet inside it is a recognition that creation and destruction are braided together, that the rhythm is larger than any king, and that too is part of the lesson. Even the flawed, even the proud, can glimpse the vast. Now, return to the banyan tree. Return to Dakshinamurti's silence, because after all the techniques, after all the stories, silence remains the most faithful teacher. It does not lie. It does not exaggerate. It simply sits with you until you notice what is already present. When I think of Mahapralaya again, I think of it as the ultimate silence spreading outward, not a void of meaning, but a quiet, so complete that the noise of separation finally stops. And perhaps that is why the myths feel suitable for sleep. Sleep is a small pralay, a tiny dissolution. You set down your roles, your plans, your fears. You return to a simpler awareness that does not need to be defended. Tonight, you do not have to hold the whole cosmos. You only have to feel your own breathing, steady and real. You only have to let the stories drift like dust in candlelight, settling wherever they settle. You only have to allow the night to do what it knows how to do. If you have listened this far, you have already practiced the same pattern. You have let stories rise in the mind, then fade. You have watched images form, then soften. You have felt the edge of darkness, then turned it into calm. So take a final, slow breath. Feel your body on the surface beneath you, supported as if the earth is a hand under your back. Notice the quiet between sounds. Notice the warmth of the room, the candlelight, the dust drifting through it like tiny stars. And if any thought appears, let it be like a little ripple on a deep river, passing without struggle. The universe in the story returns to silence, and you can return to your own, gently, without needing to understand everything, without needing to hold anything at all. Good night.